Good morning, everybody. Father John Wilson here. It is Saturday, May 23rd, and we are talking about the Fourth Commandment. So here it is from the book of Exodus, chapter 20, verse 12. Honor your father and your mother, that your days may be long in the land which the Lord your God gives you. So this is the fourth commandment, right? And so you may remember when we were breaking down the commandments in general, we noticed how the Jesus Christ's two great commandments, love the Lord your God with all your heart, mind, soul, and strength, love your neighbor as yourself, are expressed in the 10, and that commandments 1 through 3, in fact, deal with the honor we owe to God, and then 4 through 10 are about our duties towards other people. So we're now moving to the second part of the 10 Commandments. But actually, the fourth commandment is kind of a hinge between these two tablets, these two parts of the 10 Commandments, right? Because, in the second great commandment that Jesus gives us, he says, love your neighbor as yourself, right? There's a reciprocity, there's an equality there. And of course, he doesn't say love God as yourself, right? Because you should love God more than yourself because he's God. And in fact, we've received from God something that we can't pay back, our very existence. And that's why the proper response is not just one of justice, but of reverence, of gratitude, of piety. But now think about your mother and father, right? They're not God, of course, but we have all received through them the gift of life, right? Something we cannot pay back. It's impossible to give an adequate thank you to your parents. We try. We do the best we can. I love you, Mom and Dad. It's not sufficient, right? So the honor we owe our parents, in a certain sense, resembles the honor that we owe to God. And it trains us to honor God. Remember what Jesus says, in order to enter the kingdom of heaven, you must become as little children. Right? Well, because little children know their dependence. It's so clear. They need to receive everything from their parents. And so what we see as well, unfortunately, is that in a society that has stopped honoring God, that cashes out most destructively in the family. We've seen already. We've seen how hard these commandments are. And the hard part about them is that it's hard to accept that we're a creature, right? That we don't make our own rules. We don't determine our own existence. We've received our nature and our existence from God. But there's more than that too, right? We're even humbler than that because we've received that existence in a specific time and place, with a specific culture, with a specific language, and in the context of bonds and obligations to specific people. I receive who I am ultimately from God, but through my family. This was even true of Jesus Christ in his humanity, right? We read in the Gospels that he grew in wisdom and knowledge, under the care of Mary and Joseph. And, we don't think about St. Joseph enough. He's a far bigger deal than we give him credit for. But it was from him that our incarnate God learned a trade. Jesus's mannerisms, his language quirks, would have been Joseph's. It's amazing that would be the case, that he would humble himself in that way. And so, of course, we too should humble ourselves in that way by honoring our parents, by expressing gratitude and reverence. This can be difficult because to honor one's parents places a certain limitation on one's ability to define oneself. Um, Sometimes this happens in minor ways. Think about, once you're a teenager, right? You start to get embarrassed to be hanging around your parents all the time. At least, some teenagers do. Why is that? Well, because you're trying to find your own identity that's not simply, what you've been given your whole life. And, sometimes that's not a big deal, right? Sometimes you got to go through that. But when you live in a society that treats that kind of very specific teenage angst as though it's like the pinnacle of human authenticity, that's when we get problems, right? That's the source, I think, of the restlessness and the rootedlessness of contemporary society. And that leads to great sin. Look, these days, what has been one of the most tragic things about our coronavirus pandemic, right? It's the nursing homes, right? The elderly, those we should be revering and honoring above all, are in many cases the loneliest, and the most at risk. And I think as a society, and this is not to pass judgment on anyone's individual decisions, right, and how you care for your aging parents, but as a society, we have neglected our elderly. We have not thought of ourselves as bound to them, and we have made it hard to honor them in the way that we should. And I really hope what's going on these days is a wake-up call. That's a big part of honoring your father and mother, is honoring the previous generations too. Like, especially the ones who can't, like, who are needy, right? Who can't, give you stuff that you can say thank you for in the moment. How else do we keep the Fourth Commandment? Well, part of the Fourth Commandment, part of being grateful for something we can't pay back, is actually love of country, patriotism. This is Memorial Day weekend. We honor those who have given their lives for our country. You got to say thank you, right? That, Memorial Day is an expression of the Fourth Commandment, and it's a beautiful thing. Okay, so these are some of our obligations under the Fourth Commandment. But, there's a question too, right? Okay, how these things, family, country, ethnicity, right? These are not God, right? Now, how do we avoid having these things become suffocating, domineering, claiming more than they should, right? People struggle with this, right? When like just yesterday was the Feast of St. Rita of Cascia, who, her husband was killed in like a family feud, and she spent many prayers and tears pleading with her sons not to avenge their father's death. Something that you might think would be what honor of a father requires, but no, even that's got to be submitted to the law of God. And it's also true that the parents themselves have obligations under the Fourth Commandment. Parents have got to recognize that they're representatives of God's authority, not replacements for it. And so you've got to use that authority in a way that points to the higher authority. It doesn't get in the way, because your children are going to receive from you their first example, their first model of what God is like. That's a huge responsibility, and you've got to give them over to their heavenly Father, who loves them even more. This is what I tell parents who are preparing to have their children baptized. I said, hey, look, Like you're giving your child to God right now. Don't take him back, right? You're giving your permission in this moment to whatever your God calls this child to, whether it's the priesthood or religious life, whether it's becoming a missionary half a world away. Don't get in God's way. A lot of saints have struggled with domineering parents, parents whose love for them was not yet purified by the gospel. And the sort of the demands that are placed on us by our country, our nation, or even ethnicity, right? These can become totalizing demands in a way that's outside of the bounds of justice. And when they do, we've got to remember that we are first and foremost citizens of heaven. Even before we are citizens of any nation. And our first obligation is to God. That's a really freeing thing. So just one more really important expression of the Fourth Commandment for you guys. The Fourth Commandment requires our reverence for the church, who is our mother, and for our priests and bishops, who are our fathers. Look, you guys call me father, and that's a title I take really, really seriously. But I'm also a son. I'm a son of my bishop. I'm a son of the Holy Father, the Pope. And not just because I've taken a promise of obedience, but because I am a member of the church. They are my fathers. This is really important to remember, especially now, especially how, we know in recent years there have been a lot of stories about the betrayal of fatherhood on the part of priests and bishops. And, that's a hurt there, and it hurts so much because of what that relationship truly is. It's the betrayal of fatherhood. It's not just some guy acting badly, It's a father who's not being a father. But we go wrong in some of our answers to that hurt. Because I think one temptation is to just deny that there's a fatherhood there at all. I think this is what's behind this push from some quarters to just abolish the celibacy of priests, as if it would be better if priests were able to have a real family. No, I'm already a father. I already have a real family, and that's something real, and it's something joyful and life-giving. So that's not the answer. I think another way people try to cope with that hurt is even in the way that they express their anger, about, priests, or I think especially bishops, right? There's a temptation to treat our bishops as though they're like politicians that we're angry at. That's a coping mechanism. But hold on, stop, think. What do you actually do? What are you supposed to do if you're disappointed in your father? Well, you don't go rant about it on Facebook. You take it to prayer. You take it to prayer. And you give it over to God. And then, yeah, okay, you can, vent about it to your brothers and sisters a little bit, if it's helpful. And then if you can, and if it's a serious enough issue, you find a way to respectfully intervene. Okay. That's in keeping with the Fourth Commandment. But we got to treat our fathers as though they're fathers, even when we're disappointed. That's hard, but having a disappointing father or mother doesn't abolish the Fourth Commandment. It just makes something that we really have to do. It might change the details of how we keep that commandment, but ultimately it means that we It's got to be something we do relying on the love of our ultimate Father, our Father in heaven, and acting by His power, with His grace, and knowing that this commandment, like all commandments, is a life-giving thing. God bless you guys. Next up, commandment number 5.